Star System 4.5 gave us some long-awaited updates to Vulkan. So naturally, I've done a load of testing with 3 different systems and 7 different GPUs. Should we now all switch over to Vulkan? And is it safe for CIG to remove DX11 in the next major release, as they said that was the plan? The answer to both of those questions is probably not. We're going to start on the low end with a GTX 1660, and this is in the minimum spec system. So here's the graph. You can see that with an i5-10400, a 1660, and a 16GB load of RAM, well, things don't look great. Now, there's something major that's going on here that's big problems if you don't have enough VRAM. This card has only got 6GB of VRAM, and as Ali Brown himself said, if you run out of VRAM, especially on Vulkan, then you'll see huge performance dips, e.g. going from 60 FPS to 10 FPS, and this won't recover until the memory goes back under the limit. You get this thing that we talked about again in that other video. The VRAM demoted bit will come up on the display info stat stuff, and yeah, you're going to get bad times, bad performance. And again, that's reflected in this graph. This graph shows us this in action. DX11 is faster here because Vulkan is suffering from running out of memory, effectively. When I did all my testing for the graphics menu stuff, one of the things was that you basically can't get the VRAM number under 6GB. So what CIG presents to you in the bottom of the graphics menu, the little graph thing that shows you how much they're estimating you're going to use, you just can't really get it under 6GB of VRAM. And so, as you're seeing in this graph here, that kind of sucks for people who are now going to be wanting to use Vulkan. In fact, if you are using a card with 6GB of VRAM, well, the advice right now is to stay on DX11. Although, as we said, they're threatening and planning to get rid of DX11. So this whole situation is a bit of a conundrum. There's plenty of cards, especially laptop cards, that are using 6GB. And I just do not think that CIG want to be in a place where they cut out anybody with less than 8GB. I don't think CIG want to be in a case where they force people to upgrade a graphics card. And yeah, hopefully as time goes on, and CIG have mentioned that they are planning to reduce VRAM usage, but then they also said, well, we're going to have to increase it again because we're using the Planetech stuff. So it's going to be an interesting one. But right now, cards like the 2060 is very popular. The 1060, 6GB, kind of can just about play the game still, or it could at least until this update. There's a problem. If you've got 6GB of VRAM, Vulkan is not for you. But what happens with that same system if you give it a card with loads more VRAM? We have the RTX 3060, a card with 12GB of VRAM. Bizarre, not really sure why NVIDIA did this, but it's actually quite a good, viable card for kind of the low end because it's got so much VRAM. You can see in this graph that, well, the situation is now completely changed. Vulkan is now performing much better than DX11. DX11 is particularly poor here. What about the kind of low end from AMD? Well, the 5700 is a pretty decent graphics card. It's got 8GB of VRAM, which in the past has been a problem because on DX11, historically, for many years now, when I've been testing, we found that AMD cards with 8GB of VRAM struggled under DX11. Has that improved with Vulkan? That was one of the hopes. Well, unfortunately in this case, you can see we've got a DX11 result, which is pretty bad, under 20 FPS here, so lower than some of the other ones we've seen. But we've got no Vulkan result, and that's because the card was just green screening like consistently. I couldn't get the game to be open for more than about 30 seconds, and even in the menu, and it would just green screen. And so maybe that's a card, I don't know, but it's a hint that there's just so much variation here. With some cards it works quite well, some cards it doesn't work at all. There's another card coming up in a minute, big problems. It's very mixed. And so I guess if we were to answer that second question, is it safe for CIG to remove DX11 in the next major release, whatever that means? We know that that doesn't mean 4.6 because DX11 is in 4.6 and 4.6 isn't really a major release. But when it comes to 4.7, are they going to just take out DX11? I just don't think they can. I think there's going to be quite a few people who, if they do that, they just can't play the game at all. So that's going to be interesting to see what they decide to do. Next up, we move to a more mid-range system, 5800 X3D, and first of all, we're pairing it with a 6700 XT. You can see here at 1080p, where we're basically mostly CPU bound, but not completely all the time, you can see the results on the average FPS side look pretty similar. You wouldn't be able to necessarily notice the difference between 37.3 and 36.9, but this is the thing that we've seen consistently with Vulkan. The 1% percentile FPS is much better on Vulkan, and a better way to demonstrate that to you is this. This graph shows the time differences between two consecutive frame time values. And so what you can see here, I guess the easiest way to do this is blue is good, red is bad. But you can see that the time difference between consecutive frames is much, much better on Vulkan versus DX11. So what effectively happens with DX11 is that one frame might be what might be say like 10 milliseconds, and then the next one might jump right up, and then it will jump down and right up, and it's very much all over the place, bouncing often. Whereas Vulkan, the variation between frames is much less, and that's basically what we've seen since Vulkan came into Star Citizen. Again, you can see that in this frame time graph, the red is DX11 and Vulkan is green. And if you look at the bottom, you can see that the lower the number here is better. I should point that out. The red definitely dips lower than the green. So DX11's best case scenario is better. The frame time is lower, but it spikes so much higher and so much more consistently than Vulkan. So you can see the green, it's just pretty stable in the middle. And so in terms of micro stuttering, in terms of frame spikes, Vulkan is just, in my experience, when it's working, much, much smoother, but you can potentially lose a kind of peak FPS, if that makes any sense, or maximum FPS. But at 1440p, we're much more heavily on the GPU, and you can see this. DX11 again, the lead has increased. So it's technically the average FPS is a chunk better. DX11 though, again, has lower 1% percentile FPS. So Vulkan might feel smoother, but we are losing overall average FPS. And this might be to do with this thing, the idea that maybe Vulkan is heavier on the GPU than DX11. If you look at these stats here, these are kind of the sensor data stuff that CapFrameX, the program I use, pulls from all the runs. And you can see, if we look at the GPU load, for Vulkan, the average GPU load is at 97%. So basically it's nearly maxed out all the way around the run. And you can see below the time in the GPU load limit. So when it's actually at its absolute limit, 85%. If you then look at the DX11 result, you can see that, well, the GPU load, the average is only 85%, and the time in the GPU load limit is 43%. What we might guess from this is that just in general, Vulkan is just heavier on the GPU. That's probably the simplest reading of what we're seeing. It's going to be complicated because from CIG's point of view, they've said that they're expecting Vulkan to be cheaper for the CPU side. So how that all interacts here is complicated. But if we then go up to 4K, you can see again, DX11's average is significantly better. The 1% percentile FPS is much lower again. But again, there's this sense where it looks as though when you're GPU bound, Vulkan is heavier than DX11 was. And so there's some work maybe for CIG to do to reduce maybe the cost of Vulkan on the GPU side. Potentially that might be what's going on here. Next, let's move to the high end. We've got a 9800 X3D system. First, I started with Intel. So we went with the Intel B580. And what you can see here is we've only got a DX11 result again. Pretty good for DX11, to be fair, but Vulkan, it just won't get into the game. The splash screen, it just won't even go there. So I had a look, and there's an issue council report for somebody using an A770 series, another Intel GPU, and same, just trying to start the game past the splash screen, just crashes every time. And so I would imagine the amount of people on Intel is a very, very tiny percentage. But again, when we come to that question of, can CIG just turn and remove DX11, turn it off in the next major release? Well, they can't really, because there's plenty of examples here, it seems, where there's just cards that just either don't work or have got major issues. And so my guess would be, yeah, we will be seeing DX11 in the next few patches as well, whilst they smooth out some of these problems. Next, we go to the 9070 XT, AMD's kind of highest end that they're still selling. At 1080p here, where we're CPU bound, Well, you can see that Vulcan actually stretches a fair bit ahead, and so this is a good result for Vulcan. Again, the difference between kind of GPU architectures, why one company might be favored here and one company might find it harder, it's probably way beyond the scope of this video, but this is a good result for Vulcan when you are CPU bound. But at 4K, you can see, well, the gap has shrunk quite a lot, but actually Vulcan is still ahead. And again, the 1% percentile FPS is much, much better on Vulcan. So overall, if you're playing with a high-end AMD card like the 9070 XT, Vulcan looks, at least in my testing, to be a good choice. And then finally, the 5080. So the NVIDIA card that I've got, the highest end one, no money for 5090s here. But you can see here, again, at 1080p, when you're CPU bound, Vulcan is a good stretch ahead. And yeah, you wouldn't complain. Interestingly, the 1% percentile FPS is matched across both of them there. But yeah, the Vulcan experience is better. But interestingly, at 4K, when you are GPU bound, we've had a big switch up. So DX11 is now 5-ish frames ahead, and Vulcan is below for both 1% percentile FPS and average FPS. Again, maybe this is down to the fact that Vulcan is just heavier on the GPU. I don't know. That would be my guess at this stage, but hopefully you can see through all of that. It's all over the place. It's not like Vulcan has come in, we've now got this latest update that's come across from Squadron that came in 4.5 and now everything's perfect. That's definitely not where it looks like it's sitting from my testing, at least. The thing is, in talking to a load of you guys, and when I've asked people, well, what are you using and how are you finding it, it's very varied. Lots of people, like we say, are having a great time on Vulcan. The smoothness in general that we see, people are loving. But there's plenty of people who have contacted me and said, I just can't get it working. It just doesn't work. And so, yeah, lots of work for CIG to do. We'll see where this goes, but I imagine we're still probably going to have the choice between DX11 and Vulcan for a good while yet, while CIG fixes some of these problems.